Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another TASC podcast. This is the show where we talk about important issues and topics facing the UK's ambulance family. My name is Karl Demain, and I'm the CEO of the ambulance staff charity, which many people know as TASC. In recent weeks, there have been lots of media stories surrounding the LGBT plus community, especially following the Supreme Court's ruling on the definition of a woman. And I'm really pleased today, very timely, to be joined by Alastair Gunn, who is from the Yorkshire Ambulance Service. But he's with us today primarily in his role of chair of the National Ambulance LGBT plus Network, which is celebrating, I understand, Alastair, its 10th anniversary in just a few weeks' time. So welcome, Alastair, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Karl, and great to be here. Thanks for having me as part of the podcast.
Great.
Yes, 10 years. On 31st of July, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the National Ambulance LGBT plus Network, which I think is a real milestone for us. I certainly didn't think I'd be chairing that at this point. That's
Right.
been involved right from the start.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, when you kind of approach an anniversary, it actually makes you look at things and see how far things have come, and the journey that you've undertaken to get where we are today. And it's a lovely one, actually. I think so many lovely things about it, which is how it's brought people together, how we've actually managed to change the culture of the ambulance services, even if it's in a small way. I can see the change. And along the way, we've met some wonderful people, really dedicated people, and facilitated a number of conferences which have really changed people's thinking in terms of how we support staff and treat patients. So I look back on that thinking that's not a bad legacy for the first 10 years.
That's really good because it's quite positive. As you were talking, we forgot that I'd forgotten this, but it's also TASC's 10th anniversary in September when we became a charity. And I think, yeah, we're also reflecting on the things that we've achieved, things that we've done well, things that we haven't. And we're going to produce that. I'm sure you and your people in the group have actually been reflecting really strongly. So what do you think in the 10 years has been your highlight, perhaps?
Gosh, that's a good question. There's a number of highlights, if I may.
Feel free.
Well, let
Yeah,
me pick two or
absolutely.
three. I mean, I think the first one was when we started out was to establish the network, which meant getting the right people in the room and setting up the website, for example, which was, our conduit to reach out to as many people as possible. But in the process of doing that, it brought together such a vibrant group of people. And across the 10 years, I've lost count of the number of people who've been part of our committee, as we call it, the representatives from each of the services. But each of those have brought a character, a vibrancy, a commitment, and that's been wonderful. And people will have heard me say this before, but I love nothing more than when somebody's at the front of the room because they've got something to say and they kind of ground themselves and suddenly sound really passionate in the way they're talking. And we've seen so much of that, from people talking about mental health, to the care we give to patients living with HIV, to our trans colleagues, and giving them a voice, which I think was largely suppressed previously, and a range of other things as well. So that's definitely a personal highlight for me, is just to think about all the people who've been involved. The second one, though, is probably the conferences we've done, and each of those, I think we've taken a step forward and tried to do something bigger and better. God knows what we'll do for the next one, I'll say. But along the way, we've had some really inspirational speakers in there, and just one of them that well, there's a number. I think Caroline Page, who will be named that many people will know about, who's really inspirational. Her story about working in the RAF, going through transition, and yet fighting to actually stay in the RAF because she was transitioning, but also at the same time she was flying combat helicopters into war zones and removing soldiers and stuff like that. Really kind of stuff that is heroic in my opinion, but yet being treated very, well, I don't know what the word is, what she would choose herself, but it was a difficult thing. So to hear people like that, Lucian Lindsay was another one who, she talked about her job coming. She was a native Black American lady. She came to work for one of the aviation companies and based in the centre of Wales. And I remember her saying, she had to, when she got to the door every morning, just before she went through it, she had to remind herself that we are victors, not victims. And that's a kind of words that kind of resonate around my head. When you're facing that situation yourself, and a difficult day, remind yourself of that thing, and it will really serve you. A bit of a ramble there, sorry.
No, not at all. I think what came across when you were talking and what I took from it was this enthusiasm for actually bringing people together from what is probably a very diverse group of people, which is great because we are a diverse group of people. So that enthusiasm, but that enthusiasm for people sharing their stories, I think is really, really key, because we all know that one of the worst things you can feel is feel that it's only you, and that there is no way that I, can actually get through the world being the way that I am, who I am, what I want to be, what I want to become. And I think those sorts of stories are really, really important to share. And we at TASC, thinking about us for a second, we do similar things around mental health, suicide ideation. And we'll come back to it a bit later in terms of the new service we've just launched around sexual safety within the workplace. But we have noticed, I think, I haven't been here for the whole of the 10 years and like yourself, but in the few years I've been here, I've noticed that the stigma around mental health and suicide, and suicide ideation has started to at least change and have a conversation. And we've seen that change. Do you, when you reflect back, Alastair, on the last 10 years, do you see a change within the ambulance services themselves in the way that they embrace diversity in all of its forms?
Oh, very much so. I mean, when I started, so I've been in the service 22 years, and I always remember going to like a very rural station in Yorkshire, starting, and the very friendly staff, but there were some things that really surprised me. And there were only two female members of staff on the station out of a staff of about 30. And there was a number of men who quite happily went around saying this is no job for a woman. And that really shocked me, actually, particularly coming from a different career. I just kind of think how far we've come, that, our gender split in the ambulance service is largely 50-50. Thinking back to 22 years ago, I was quite afraid of what would happen if people found out that I was gay. Would I be treated differently? But yet, looking now, in all respects of diversity, I think things have moved forward. I'm not going to say that we're in the right place yet. Things are moving forward. And as with any kind of topic like this, things move forward and backwards. So we have to be really careful. But yes, things have definitely changed. I think even the existence of things like the staff network, so there's the LGBT plus network that I chair, but there's also the BME, the Disability Network, and others actually coming on board now. Those are increasing the vibrancy of the ambulance service and allowing people to connect with others and be themselves at work. And that means we're celebrating our workforce and allowing people to interact in much more rich and dynamic ways, I believe. So it's really important. I think nothing demonstrates that more than things like the Pride events. And some people are very critical of this, but the opportunity to bring LGBT plus staff together at a celebration event is one side of it. But then I always think about what the people watching the parade actually view our service as when they see the kind of vibrancy and how we celebrate our staff, but also make it really clear that our services are for everybody. And I think, when you talk about things like suicide and the actual consequences of not being open are poor mental health and, the inevitable consequences of that. So there's very good reasons why we should be supporting our staff and allowing them to be themselves at work.
I think that's really interesting. And it's good to hear that, that progress that you described, because we pick up that as well from the people that we support that come to us, because obviously we at TASC support people from across, I can use the expression, the whole spectrum. And what is really interesting is obviously that communities often think of themselves as being one thing, and I'm talking about the ambulance community here, but obviously, the people are drawn from the communities that they serve. And I think the point that you make about celebrating the diversity is a really important way to demonstrate that the services are there for yourselves, that you're not just this binary thing that's there to help
Yeah.
people. So I think that's really, really important. And I think it's also, I think for me, it's understanding who is part of the community that you as chair represent, because there's a lot of talk about how the group is actually described. And I know that you've done quite a lot of work around getting
Yes.
consistency across the sector for the descriptors. And I think I might have even slightly misdescribed at the start of this. So
Oh, don't worry.
how how have you actually sort of reached this? Because I see that you're the LGBT plus network. So who
Yes.
is the network for, and how have you got to this consistent descriptor?
Yeah, what's really interesting this, isn't it? Because the full acronym is something like LGBTQQIAAP. I'll give myself a tick for actually getting that right. So, and that encompasses kind of all the variations around two things actually, which is
Mhm.
sexual orientation and gender identity. So,
Yeah.
forget what the acronym is. That's what we're dealing with. People's sexual
Okay.
orientation and gender identity. But just to address the issue of how we label ourselves, something was said to me a few years ago that really stuck in my mind, which was somebody said, "How do you expect to be taken seriously if you can't make your mind up what to call yourselves?" And that was just in reference to the fact that we've got LGBT plus, we've got LGBTQ plus, we've got LGBTQIA, various versions of the acronym. And no one's got a definitive answer about this, which is the right one. So we've kind of canvassed within the ambulance service when we show strength in unity that we use one and we use it consistently. And basically, we'd already selected LGBT plus, so we kind of encouraged other people to follow. So there was nothing more scientific than that, if I'm quite honest about it. And ACE and the College of Paramedics have largely embraced. I know yourself, Karl, from the conversations we've had previously, which again, it's just trying to eliminate the kind of confusion and show strength within the sector. Although I completely acknowledge there are different versions and different opinions on this. But who is it for? The wider acronym in LGBT plus is people of all sexual orientations and all gender identities.
Mhm.
So actually, that's a huge number of people. And the thing in the 10 years of the network, one thing we identified very clearly was in the room and in the committee, we readily understood the LGB part and sexual
Mhm.
orientation, and there've been huge advances in that area. But the T part and gender identity was something that we weren't comfortable with in the sense that we didn't really understand it, or we weren't hearing the voices from people. So within that 10 years, our journey is one that I'm very proud of as well, is that we've really tried to work on that area and
Mhm.
get our knowledge and our resources to the same level as the sexual orientation part. So we now have people on the committee. We've got a number of resources that we've created to support people, and we're very visible at events. And even the committee, when events got difficult recently with the UK Supreme Court ruling, the committee immediately stepped up and ramped up the support that was available within the service. So that's the it's an extremely we talk about minorities, but an extremely big minority when you consider all those areas. And we're really dealing with two things here. That's the
Mhm.
important bit to remember.
Okay. No, it's really interesting because I think you use an expression. It's a sizable minority or a big minority,
Absolutely.
which is really important, I think, to recognize that we are not just talking about one or two people. We're talking about probably a sizable population that would describe themselves in the way that you have described and feel part of the group that you are trying to support, the people you're trying to support, which is around, as you say, the two things, the sexual orientation and the gender identification. And of
Yeah.
course, you can't use gender identification without, as you did, raising the issue of this recent Supreme Court decision. And, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know whether you're a lawyer, but
Definitely
it's
not.
not probably not a good thing to debate the rightness or wrongness
Yeah.
of the legality of that. But I noticed recently, I think it was at Cheltenham Literary Festival, Dame Barbara Hale, who was the first female president of the Supreme Court, famous for her spider brooch in the Brexit
Yes.
things, actually was sharing a panel with her daughter and put Q&A question. And obviously the Supreme Court decision came up. And Dame Barbara was very careful to avoid any discussion of the legality of it or criticising that. Um, but what she did talk about, and I think I'd be interested in your views on this,
Mhm.
is, and she said she was prepared to criticise the reaction to the judgment, which he categorised, and I think there was a very careful choice of terms here, whereas the judgment didn't go anywhere near this, that the reaction was extremely binary
Yes.
and, quite a polarized debate in any event, as we all know, a lot of the new councils that have been elected are actually talking about taking down flags,
Yes.
not having pride events, getting rid of DEA, etc. Which is a debate we can have at another time. But the reaction has been very binary,
Yes.
and people have gone even further in that polarization. Um, which is, I think, taking us backwards in a way, because the debate is far more nuanced than that. And
I'd agree.
I'm quite interested from a task perspective in how we support the ambulance as to how you view the reaction within the ambulance trusts to the issue, because it sort of almost conflicts with what you were talking about right at the start, this 10 years of good progress. And then along comes this thing that seems to just widen the chasm. So how do you think they've reacted?
Oh gosh, I mean that's quite a complex answer actually, because
Mm.
I mean the impact definitely has impacted on trans people. I think very negatively in the sense that it's not legitimating people's transition basically,
Mm.
and giving legal recognition of that, which for people I think that's seen as a really backward step.
Yeah.
For our work, we'd really try to push. Let's get the care right. Let's support our colleagues. Let's
Mhm.
acknowledge people. Let's increase our confidence and let's get this right. And let's really support everyone. That's the idea of it. So here comes a piece of legislation um, which actually contradicts another one, which, if you look at the Equality Act 2010, says, it's unlawful to discriminate against people on the grounds of gender identity. Yet there's actually no
Mhm.
legal recognition. So it's how you make all that work together. So for us, it's forced us to think about how we're supporting people more than the progressive stuff that we'd like to be doing at this time. But there's been a really interesting reaction actually
Mhm.
from ACE and from most of our chiefs in our ambulance services, who were really keen to react to this and make sure that we weren't going backwards and that we were reaffirming the support that we were offering to our trans
Uh-huh.
colleagues, and to let them know
Mhm.
that they were a valued part of our workforce and we wanted to do the right things by them. So we need to take stock of what was happening, but at the same time, there was no lack of willingness to offer that support. There's a bit of work I've been doing, um, and we've got all the human resources directors involved in doing a premises audit. So we're looking at
Mhm.
our own estates profile. Bear in mind that a lot of our estates and ambulance stations are extremely old.
Mhm.
Were built way before the Equality Act.
Yeah.
Some of them not fit for purposes. Not
Mhm.
really the best places to run ambulances from. Never mind, the kind of the current issues that we're facing. So there's a huge estates reprofiling probably needed in future.
Mhm.
And we have to face that challenge. We need to understand the extent of the problem, which is really interesting that all the human resources directors are really supporting that move. And then the discussion is about having a national response to this to understand what we can do, and how we can provide support,
Yeah.
but at the same time acknowledging the limitations that we have within our service, which I think is a really brave but actually
Mhm.
really meaningful way to actually deal with this. And it will look at things like how we make reasonable adjustments for people,
Yeah.
how we induct people into our services, and how we support people transitioning at work and all those kind of things. Extremely complex, but I think our response um, and I'm really proud of the chiefs and the HRDs and everyone who's kind of embraced this, has been support first, and then we'll look at the fallout from this legislation and what it means later on.
That's really, really, it's interesting and heartening at the same time, because you're quite right. Yeah, I totally agree that it's a hugely complex area. The debate always has been, and
Yes.
it's confused because it's something that people have very strong views about, often for what they consider to be moral or ethical reasons. Um, every complicated topic gets thrown in: religion,
Yeah.
etc., etc.
Well,
Um,
that's the thing we can't change, Karl, is the fact that,
yeah,
the society we live in, like you say, that kind of binary comment that was made. Yeah, if you are transphobic, it's almost legitimated. Well, there's no legal
yeah,
recognition, so let's like reinforce that view. If you look at social media and the hostility, which has never gone away actually, and has been very
no,
prevalent for trans
no,
people, it's taken a step up. So
mhm.
although we might be doing the right things, the society we live in and the world actually isn't particularly supportive to people, unfortunately. So yeah, at a very difficult time, I think. And we've yet more to learn. I know we promised guidance from NHS England, which I'm hoping will provide some support, actually, but it remains to be seen what actually the content of that will be, and where that will take us.
It's really, it's one of those topics you can talk about for a long time, but you
Yes.
here got the law interfering in, um, people's rights to decide who
Yeah.
they are, and gender, sexual orientation, all of these things are a really important uh, right, I think, for people, and something that needs to be respected. Rubbing up against, the sort of political challenges, the sort of the challenge that you've put about people's views and
Yeah.
phobias, but also running up again. How does one put this? But I'll include myself in this as well. Generational shifts, because
Yeah.
when I was thinking about, our conversation today, I thought, well, I was actually born before the decriminalization of homosexuality.
Yeah.
And I have noticed, during my lifetime, the way in which things have changed
Yeah.
much for the better. Absolutely, with that, much, much better. And I think when you get this thing that causes this big disruption, which it has, and will continue to do, there is a real danger if people don't stand up and be counted and value diversity, that it opens the floodgates to push back even further.
Yeah. I'm
Is
glad you're
that is
saying
that
this, Carl, because if you um, there's an assumption that things written into law are the right answer and is the right thing to do. And I'm not going to, I shouldn't comment on that. And it's not right to put a value on it. It was people way more qualified to look at the law have kind of made that decision. But what I do, and it is completely what you've just said, look back in history and you can see examples of how things have changed. And you said they're very much for the better. So 200 years ago, we were hanging people because they were gay, before the decriminalisation of gay people in 1967, we were chemically castrating or even imprisoning people because they were gay. And now we look at that and think that was just ridiculous. And we've moved forward with our thinking. So it doesn't always stand to reason that the law actually is the right thing to do, even though, we have to comply with it. And whilst we
yeah,
have to respect it, some of us have to be brave and actually point out that this isn't supporting a group of
yeah.
our people.
Which is why it was really good when you said at going back to this section on the Supreme Court, the reaction of the ambulance services at a very senior level, the
Yes.
reaction of the HRDs, etc., which is really, really important.
Yeah.
And and obviously, I think what's also heartening is that no one's rushing to demand changes in the law and clarify, because it needs a period of reflection. Because one of the things that we see at TASC is that there is, you talked earlier on that you've been in the ambulance service, I think 20 odd years, you said,
Yes.
that there are people that we see who've been in 40 years often.
Yes.
And this generational shift is there. And we often see the retentions between the way in which the, the new we come across paramedics who've just come out of university, this very liberal, this quite supportive environment where everything's good, but also they've got different attitudes, different beliefs, you know, as as a majority, as you know, always they're coming and hitting the ambulance service, and that where you've got those generational
Mm.
plates coming against each other, tectonic plates coming against each other, that always causes tensions. Do you see any of that at all?
I do. I've seen a few earthquakes recently. We've been talking about tectonic plates. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good point, actually, because student paramedics in university, we've seen examples of um, usually young men, actually, who are in a very liberal environment,
Uh-huh.
throw themselves in that environment, and they come on placement within our ambulance services. And it largely depends who their mentor is. And
Hmm.
sometimes those mentors are, and I would say the majority are absolutely outstanding. Don't
Hmm.
get me wrong, but we
Yeah.
have seen a number of examples where that has not worked very well at all, and
Yeah.
even brings into question, the whole sexual safety element that is, really raising the profile of that at the moment within services, and I know is something that you're supporting colleagues with.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, so that can be a really, almost like a clash of cultures, and I hope
Hmm.
people transition to that. Imagine you're a shiny new paramedic, you're doing your course and feeling really proud and are ready to go and work in the service, and then suddenly you arrive day one and find out the environment is not what you expected, and that you have to change the way you present yourselves, or feel that's
Hmm.
something that you have to do. It must be quite an awful thing, an awful experience, and something
Yeah.
that we ought to think about and make sure that our new paramedics are safe in that way.
Yeah.
So
That's a really interesting one. That sort of feeling that you have to fit into what you perceive the culture to be
yes,
seems very much like a big step backwards in terms of how people with different sexual orientations used to feel in society as a whole.
yes,
And I think it is a challenge, and I think you're quite right. It's certainly the minority, but again, it's a sizable minority from what we see because we launched the sexual safety support service. To create a safe space for people to come and seek support.
yes.
And that was interesting because the first three people that contacted us were young males
Gosh,
um, from
yeah,
within the
that's
service.
not surprising.
Yeah, and now some of that was surprising to us because you always think about sexual safety being male on female predation, but actually it isn't just that. It's also about banter. It's about culture. It's about feeling that your orientation or the gender identity that you are choosing is somehow makes you vulnerable and makes you a target within
Yes,
the organization that you come to trust and pushes back very strongly against what you were talking about, Alastair, much earlier, which is the inclusivity of the service as a whole. And I must admit, I do think I've been really, coming from the outside of the service, I have been really pleased at how
yes.
inclusive it is. And it's interesting. So,
These examples are really small, usually
yeah.
quite isolated, but I mean, I've heard some that actually go further than this. It's not just banter, but one young man actually, his mentor, um, I would say, assaulted him. Basically, he
Mhm.
groped him, saying, making fun of the situation, saying, "I understand you like this," as his way of kind of referring to his sexual orientation. And I think that's horrific, actually. But that was
Yeah.
kind of passed off as, oh, it's just bands, it's just trying to get to know people. But I think, I mean, it's interesting. It doesn't surprise me that you've actually had those kind of representations from young men, because probably they don't want to go to their services and challenge it either. So that the importance of an independent voice in this and the service that you're offering there, I think is really significant.
Mm.
And yeah, very, very interesting. Mm.
And the whole concept, I mean, you're quite right to sort of pull it out that banter and a bit of fun often isn't actually banter and a bit of fun.
Mm.
It's ultimately about power control
Yes.
and feeling that you've got you have the right to treat people badly because of your view about who, what, how they present,
Yeah.
and hopefully we are part of that. That's pushing back against that in the way that we can.
Yes,
Um, we've covered an awful lot of ground in quite a
we have.
a short period of time, and I think it's one of those. But one of the things, we've gone to some of the things that are there, and obviously the Supreme Court ruling is going to have, impact running forward. Hopefully, people will, the binary that we talked about will come back towards a much more middle ground to represent society as a whole. Because sometimes the law, I mean, you might not want to say this, but I will, but sometimes the law is behind the wave of societal change, and eventually the law catches up, which is a good thing.
Yes.
But that's so sort of looking forward, Alistair, we've come a long way. So if we were sitting here at your 10th, 20th anniversary coming up on the 21st of July, I'm testing my maths here, 30,
2035.
2035, blimey, yeah. God. Um, what do you think if what would you like the world in the ambulance service to be like? And what would you be saying then were the things that you would want to achieve by then?
Wow, that's a very searching question. Just first thing I should say, I mean, we're looking at the new chair arrangements, so
Yeah,
imminently, and looking forward to not just handing over. Although it
right.
will be with a kind of bit of sadness in me to let something go that I've been very passionate about. But I am excited to see what the next stage of it is and what people do.
Yeah,
But if I was involved in 10 years, I mean, there are big challenges for the ambulance services in the NHS coming up that
mhm,
in my main role in the ambulance service, I'm kind of really exposed to. So, how are we going to deal with the increase in an aging population with multiple comorbidities? How are we going to
mhm,
handle the fact there's going to be a shrinking workforce? Which kind of the clue is that we've got to do what we do better and more efficiently. And really look after the people that work in the service because we want to retain them and make sure they're really valued and want
yeah,
to stay and develop their careers to do more than we're doing now.
yeah,
So, going out to people, just leaving them at home, referring them, and all those kind of things. So, actually, the challenge for the service really, I think we can filter down into all the staff networks in the areas.
yeah,
So, hey, how do we get our workplaces and our cultures right so that they're supporting people and making the ambulance service an absolutely wonderful place to work and that you wouldn't really want to go everywhere else? And anywhere else, should I say there? But there's a big challenge there, and we need to consider all groups of people and what would make that difference. Um, I think we've got to, for sexual orientation and for our, LGBT colleagues, I think we're on the right journey. I think things like the Rainbow Star and the visibility within our services, how we celebrate and how we recognise events, the continuing the work around supporting patients differently, people understanding that also understand their colleagues better. So I think we're on the really right track there, and we just need more to continue. For the whole gender identity bit, I think that's going to be rocky for a couple of years with the stuff that's going on. But again, I think we shouldn't lose pace. I'm hoping that whoever is taking this forward makes sure that the profile of that work continues, and that we look to. One thing I'd really like to see is a package of mandatory training to help people understand
mhm,
trans colleagues and patients. So there's a
yeah,
slant depending whether you're patient facing or not. But we make that part of our mandatory training because we know it's an area that people feel uncomfortable and have lack of knowledge about. So if we achieve nothing more than that in the next 10 years, we'll have made a really significant inroad into the challenge that's facing us. I hope that's a good answer, but
uh,
more of the same with some real targeted improvements on certain areas, I think is my
oh,
mantra.
yeah. No, I think that's a really good answer. And there's a couple of things in there that struck me straight away is that your emphasis on the whole of the organization and all of
Mm.
its people is actually the bit to hold on to, because this is not about we have to support them more than we support them. This is about the whole organization
Yes.
representing the society that you are providing support to. And I think that's a really good ambition that we're not really having this. conversation in quite the same terms. We're having it about people because that's who we're talking about here. And I think that's really powerful. And the bit that we haven't had time to talk about today, which you also alluded to, is actually how the because to actually provide the care and support that you require to the community, you need to understand the changing community needs. And you talked a little bit there about understanding the challenges around it, but that's for another day.
We'll
So I've
do
got,
part two, Karl. Yeah.
we'll do part two. No, I'd love to do part two because there's an awful lot we haven't talked about, which is good. But certainly if I firstly, from a TASC perspective, we are hugely supportive of what your
Absolutely.
committee is attempting to achieve and promoting and supporting diversity within our own organisation as well as within the ambulance support services. From a message from us is we're here for
Yes.
all people within the ambulance service, and that's really important for us to get across. I suppose I always ask this question of people that come on is there anything more we could do? If there's, you know, I know that there must be and there will be, and resources are always an issue, but is there anything more we can do?
Again, Carl, we've spoken at length a number of times, haven't we? So
Yeah.
I guess in this podcast, I'd like to just reassure anyone who's listening that in the ambulance service, we're also about joining the dots and making sure that all the parts of it actually provide a level of support. And I know TASC, your commitment to do that is, you know, excellent. And I would happily advocate that anyone who was worried about making an approach to TASC don't. It's one of the most inclusive areas. I guess the challenge is then to make sure that we have the right visibility. So I hate the idea of there being currency, and that probably comes across in what I've said previously in areas of diversity. That if we say one bit's more important than another, although we know
Yeah.
events happen that challenge that at times, so we have to offer more support. We all have to be taking the steps together and forward, or else it doesn't work. And part of that is making sure that we do make sure that there's visibility about all issues. So I guess, and I know we're in the process of doing this, aren't we? Looking at the website and making sure that we have the right visuals and references, that we specifically mention LGBT plus in like services like your sexual safety thing and the crisis line, because we know people will actually take that more seriously if they see those references in there. So I guess that's the only area really, I would say, and it's actually something we're working on anyway, and to reassure people.
That's really good. And so Alastair, thank you.
No
It's
problem at all.
been a really interesting, I think, sometime around 35, 40 minutes of a conversation. Hope our listeners enjoy it too and get something from it. And likewise, we would encourage people to look look out for the networks that exist. And you name checked quite a lot of the other networks because it's very easy just to focus
Yes.
on this. But thank you again for your support of TASC and what we're doing and what we're looking at. And I very much look forward to being introduced by you to your new chair so that we can carry on staying in contact. And part two beckons probably. So
Yeah.
Alastair,
Can I
thank
add
you.
one thing for anyone
Of
who's
course you can,
perhaps
yeah.
wants to explore the network, the
Yeah.
LGBT plus network, and wants to see what we're doing? We have a really vibrant website. So it's ambulancelgbt.org, and that will take you to a place where there's lots of different resources, and also you can find the details of local networks, all the contacts to do with that as well. So that's a useful link for people as a result of this. And thank you very much for having me.
Alastair, thank you. Thank you for taking the time out. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will speak very, very soon.
No problem. Thank you very much, Karl.